The woman in seat 2A had not slept in 31 hours. Her name was not on the flight manifest the way most names are. It was preceded by 3 letters Ms. and followed by a title that took up 2 lines of a business card. She was the founder and executive chairwoman of Veridian Structural Solutions, a firm that designed the bones of buildings in 14 countries. She had shaken hands with 2 sitting heads of state. She had been photographed for the cover of Architecture Quarterly 4 times. She was also in seat 2A of United Flight 1147 from Chicago O'Hare to Seattle-Tacoma, completely and silently terrified. Not of flying, of silence itself. Because Eleanor Voss had been deaf for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, and she had not told a single person who worked for her. She watched the jetway separate from the plane. She watched the flight attendant's mouth move in the safety demonstration. She read the woman's lips and understood perhaps 40% of what she said, and the other 60% she filled in from memory, because she had sat in first-class cabins often enough to know that the demonstration always ended with the same sentence. The man in seat 2B arrived at the last moment. He did not rush, that was the first thing she noticed. He moved through the boarding door at the pace of someone who is never late, even when he cuts it close. He wore a gray jacket that had been washed many times. His carry-on was a duffel bag, not a rolling case. He was perhaps 40, perhaps 42. There was a fold in his face near his left eye that had nothing to do with age. He sat. He buckled his seatbelt. He looked out the window at the tarmac. He did not look at her. The quiet life of Marcus Hale. His name was Marcus Hale. The people who knew him, and there were not many because he had arranged his life that way, knew him as the man who came to work at the Ashford Hotel in downtown Chicago 40 minutes before his shift began. He was a facilities coordinator. The title meant that he fixed things, plumbing, HVAC calibration, the elevator that shuddered on the 9th floor whenever the barometric pressure dropped. He had a small office in the basement, next to the boiler room, with a metal desk and a chair he'd brought from home, because the one they gave him hurt his back. On the desk there was a photograph, a girl, perhaps 9 years old, sitting in a hospital bed with a coloring book spread across her knees. She was looking at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. It was the expression of a child who has learned to be brave. Her name was Lily. She had been born with a moderate to severe bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, the kind that does not announce itself the way some conditions do, but reveals itself slowly in the slight tilt of a head, the way she asked people to repeat themselves, the way she watched mouths instead of eyes. She was 10 years old now. She wore hearing aids that had cost Marcus $1,400, and she attended the Fitzgerald School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing on the north side of Chicago, where tuition ran to $22,000 a year on a sliding scale scholarship that covered 60%. Marcus covered the rest. He had not always been a facilities coordinator. But that is not a story he told, so we will arrive at it the way the people in his life arrived at it, slowly and only in fragments. The woman at the Ashford who knew him best was a housekeeper named Rosario, who had worked at the hotel for 19 years and who brought Marcus a coffee in a ceramic mug every morning at 6:45 because she said the paper cups made good coffee taste like wet cardboard, and she was not wrong. She had noticed in the 2 years since Marcus came to the hotel that he carried a book in the breast pocket of his jacket, always a different book, and always a thin one, as though he rationed himself. She had noticed that he sometimes stopped in the middle of a repair and wrote something in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil. She had noticed that when the hotel's structural engineer came for the quarterly inspection, Marcus sometimes asked questions that made the engineer pause before answering. She had never asked him about any of it. Because Marcus had a quality that made you feel that asking would be wrong, not rude exactly, but wrong, like pulling on a thread. He drove a 2011 Honda Civic with a crack in the rear passenger side window that he had repaired with a strip of clear weather tape. The tape had been there for 7 months, not because he could not afford the repair, because there were other things to afford first. On Tuesdays and Thursdays he picked Lily up from school at 3:15. He was always there before the bell. He always stood at the second pillar from the door, not the first, because the first was in the shade and he had learned that Lily liked to walk out into sunlight. He had learned this without her telling him. He had learned it by watching. They communicated in American Sign Language, which Marcus had begun learning 18 months before Lily was diagnosed. Back when the audiologist had said the words progressive and likely in the same sentence, and Marcus had driven home that night and sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens for 20 minutes, and then gone inside and bought a book called ASL, a student text, and read the first chapter in the car before he drove the rest of the way home. By the time Lily needed it, he was fluent. He had not told anyone at the Ashford Hotel about this. It was not relevant to his job, it was not something he offered. But it was there, the way all the most important things are beneath the surface, waiting. The morning of the flight, Marcus woke at 4:40. The flight to Seattle was for a facilities conference, a 3-day event at the Westin in downtown Seattle that the Ashford's general manager, a man named David Cho, had approved Marcus for because there was a session on sustainable HVAC systems that David thought might be useful. David had booked the cheapest available fare, which turned out to be first class on the early United departure, because the coach seats were sold out and the hotel's conference budget had a use it or lose it clause that expired on the 15th. Marcus had packed the night before. The duffel bag contained 3 changes of clothes, a toiletry kit, a legal pad, 2 mechanical pencils, a copy of The Architecture of Happiness by Elaine de Botton, and a Ziploc bag with 6 of the oatmeal cookies Lily had made on Sunday in the shape of irregular stars because she had not yet mastered the art of cookie cutters but did not mind. He had not brought his ASL reference cards. He knew it well enough now that he no longer needed them. At 5:10 he looked in on Lily, who was asleep at her grandmother's house, Marcus's mother, a retired music teacher named Cora, who had moved from Detroit to Chicago 18 months ago without being asked, because she understood that some things did not require being asked. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Lily's hearing aids were in the case on the nightstand. Her coloring book was open on the pillow beside her. She had fallen asleep mid-drawing. The crayon, a dark blue, was still in her hand. Marcus looked at her for 11 seconds. Then he pulled the door almost closed, left a note on the kitchen counter that said "Back Thursday, cookies in the tin, I love you," and he left. On the plane, he did not introduce himself to the woman in 2A. This was not rudeness, it was habit. He had learned over years of sharing small spaces with strangers that most people did not want to talk. They wanted the appearance of sociability without its actual demands. He respected this. He understood it, he even preferred it. He took out his legal pad. He had been working in the small hours of recent weeks on a structural analysis of the Ashford's East Wing. Not because anyone had asked him to, because he had noticed in the course of repairing a drainage issue on the 14th floor that the weight distribution through the east stairwell did not match what it should be, given the building's age and the apparent thickness of its load-bearing walls. He had requested the original blueprints through a chain of 3 emails to the city planning office, and received them 6 weeks later in a scanned PDF that was barely legible. He had been working from those scans. On the legal pad, he translated them into cleaner sketches. His handwriting was precise and very small, annotating load calculations in the margins. The woman in 2A watched him from the corner of her eye. She was watching his hands. What the hands say? Eleanor Voss had learned to watch hands 11 months ago, when the audiologist, a quiet, careful man named Dr. Farouk, had sat across from her in his office on the 41st floor of Northwestern Memorial's outpatient tower, and explained that the condition she had been managing with medication for 3 years had progressed beyond what management could address. She would not recover her hearing. Not fully, not with current technology, not with surgery. The cochlear implant was an option, still was, but the nerve involvement was complex, and the outcomes in her specific case were uncertain. She had sat in that chair and looked at his hands while he talked, because she could not read his mouth clearly, and because she was trying not to let her face do anything that she would not be able to control. She had her company to run. Veridian Structural Solutions was in the middle of the most consequential contract negotiation of its 18-year existence, a $2.3 billion infrastructure project in Seattle called the Cascade Gateway, 3 mixed-use towers, a pedestrian bridge, and a transit hub, all built on landfill above a seismic fault line. The engineering complexity was extraordinary. The bid required Eleanor's personal signature and her personal presence at 4 board reviews and 2 city council sessions. She could not afford, she had decided, sitting in that chair while Dr. Farouk's hands rested flat on the desk, to be perceived as diminished. So she had said nothing. To no one. Her executive assistant, a woman named Priya, had noticed that Eleanor had stopped using the phone. Eleanor said she preferred written communication. Priya adapted. The board had noticed that Eleanor now always sat at the head of the table rather than the center. Eleanor said it was better for sight lines. The board adapted. Her chief structural engineer, a man named Oliver Crane, had noticed that Eleanor sometimes asked him to repeat himself. Eleanor said the acoustics in the boardroom were poor. Oliver said nothing because Oliver Crane had worked for Eleanor Voss for 11 years and had learned that some questions had costs. She had built an entire architecture of deception around her silence. It was, she would think later, the most elaborate structure she had ever designed. And it was failing. The crisis had arrived 9 days ago in the form of a courier envelope. Inside, a letter from the Cascade Gateway Project's lead city council liaison, a woman named Sandra Kerr, requesting clarification on a specific load-bearing specification in Veridian's submitted structural drawings. Section 7, subsection C, the foundation transfer beams on Tower 2. The specification, Sandra Kerr's letter politely noted, appeared to be inconsistent with the seismic resilience requirements in the Seattle Building Code as amended 18 months prior. Eleanor had read the letter 4 times. She had called Oliver Crane into her office. Oliver had looked at the specification. He had looked at it for a long time. Then he had said very quietly that the specification had been submitted by the team that Eleanor herself had approved, and that the seismic amendment was new enough that the team may not have incorporated it. He had said may not have. Eleanor had read his lips carefully. She had then asked him to fix it. Oliver had nodded, and then he had said something that Eleanor missed 3 words, she thought, possibly 4, and she had nodded as though she understood, because that was what she had learned to do, and Oliver had left the room. What Oliver had said, which Eleanor had not caught, was, "It will take weeks." The Seattle City Council was reviewing all Cascade Gateway submissions on Friday. This Friday, which was, Eleanor looked at her watch, the old one with the scratched crystal face, the one she wore because her ex-husband had given it to her when they broke ground on Veridian's first project, and she had never found a satisfactory reason to replace it 4 days away. She was flying to Seattle now to appear before the council in person, to buy time, to project confidence, to hold the structure together with her presence alone because she did not have anything else to offer. She was terrified. She had not slept. She was watching the man in 2B make marks on a legal pad with a mechanical pencil, and his handwriting was so precise that she could read the numbers from her seat. And the numbers were structural calculations, load figures, moment forces, and she understood them because she had spent 30 years understanding exactly these kinds of numbers. And they were, she leaned forward just slightly, they were correct. More than correct. They were elegant. Eleanor Voss had 3 options. The first, look away and sleep. She hadn't slept in 31 hours and she needed to. The second, interrupt the man and ask him what he was doing, which she could not do effectively without speech. And speech had become difficult for her to calibrate since losing her hearing. She could not hear herself, could not judge her own volume, and had developed in 11 months a controlled dread of speaking to strangers. The third option arrived the way third options always do, sideways, uninvited, and completely obvious once it appeared. She opened the Notes app on her phone. She typed, "Are you a structural engineer?" She held the phone out toward him. Marcus Hale looked at the phone. He looked at it for a moment in the way that some people look at an unexpected question, not with surprise, but with assessment. Then he turned back to his legal pad. He wrote something. He tore the sheet off carefully at the perforated edge and held it out toward her. Oh, she took it. What's the problem? Eleanor did not answer immediately. This was new for her. She was a woman who had spent her career being the first one to speak in any room. She had learned, because she had had to, the value of the pause, the weight of held words. She typed for a long time. Then she turned the phone toward him. It said, "I have a structural specification under review by a city council. Seismic resilience. Seattle Code Amendment 18 months ago. My team may have submitted the pre-amendment version. Council review is Friday. I need to know if it's fixable in 4 days or if I'm about to lose a $2.3 billion contract." Marcus read it. He read it the way he did everything, without apparent urgency, but with complete attention. He wrote on the legal pad, "Which amendment, the lateral force modification or the liquefaction zone revision?" Eleanor stared. She typed, "You know these." He wrote, "The liquefaction revision added a 1.4 safety factor to transfer beams on reclaimed land, tower foundations on fill sites. It changed everything." Which site? She typed, "Landfill, former industrial, near the waterfront." He wrote, "Then it's the liquefaction revision. Can I see the submitted specification?" She opened her email. She found the PDF. She tilted the screen toward him. He read it. He read it for 4 minutes. He did not react. He did not make a sound. He made 2 marks on his legal pad, not calculations yet, just marks the way a surgeon marks before a cut. Then he wrote, "It's fixable, not in 4 days normally, but there's a path. Do you want the path?" Eleanor looked at the note. She looked at the man who had written it. His jacket had been washed many times. His watch was cheap. There was a fold in his face near his left eye that she now understood had been put there by something she did not yet know. He had not told her his name. He had not asked for hers. He was sitting in first class because of some clerical accident. She was reasonably certain: the duffel bag, the conference lanyard peeking from the side pocket, the legal pad instead of a laptop. She was becoming more certain of this with every note they exchanged, one of the most structurally literate people she had encountered in 30 years of building things. She typed, "Yes, I want the path." He picked up his mechanical pencil. He wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. The path was this. The pre-amendment specification was not wrong, it was incomplete. The transfer beams were sized correctly for vertical load. What they lacked was the revised lateral resistance calculation that the liquefaction zone amendment required. That calculation, in the specific conditions of the Cascade Gateway Tower 2 site, could be retrofitted into the submitted drawings by modifying 3 sections and adding 1 new appendix. It was not a redesign. It was a correction. A correction that required someone who understood seismic soil behavior at reclaimed industrial sites, who could run the lateral force equations from the amended code, who had enough structural engineering judgment to know which existing elements were already compliant and which needed revision. It required, in other words, exactly the skills that Marcus Hale had spent the first 15 years of his career developing before he had put them in a drawer and become a facilities coordinator. He had written all of this on 6 pages of the legal pad in columns with small annotated diagrams. He had done it in the way he did everything, without comment, without announcement, without the look that some people get when they are demonstrating capability. He tore the pages from the pad. He held them out. She took them. She read them. The flight was 3 hours and 42 minutes from gate to gate. By the time they began their descent into Seattle, she had read every page 3 times. She typed on her phone for a long moment, then she turned it toward him. "Who are you?" He wrote, "Marcus Hale, Facilities Coordinator, Ashford Hotel, Chicago." She read it. She typed before that. He wrote, "Structural Engineer, licensed in Illinois and Washington State, formerly." She typed, "Why formerly?" He looked at the question. He looked out the window at the cloud layer below them, pale and formless. He wrote, "Family reason." She read it. She typed, "Will you help me fix this?" He looked at the note for a moment. He wrote, "That depends." She typed, "On what?" He wrote, "On whether your team has the full site survey data from the original soil boring report. If they do, I can do it in 2 days. If they don't, it'll take longer." She typed immediately, "They do. I had them run it before the bid. I have it on the drive." He wrote, "Then I can do it in 2 days." She typed, "Why would you?" He considered this for a moment. He wrote, "You didn't say you were embarrassed by the mistake. You just asked how to fix it. I respect that." She read it. She did not type anything for a while. The descent continued. The clouds broke. The city appeared below, gray and green and tessellated with water. She looked at it. She looked at the scratched face of the old watch on her wrist. She typed, "I should tell you something." He waited. She typed, "I'm deaf. I lost my hearing 11 months ago. I haven't told my board. I haven't told my team. The reason I can see these calculations is that when you can't hear anything, you learn to read the world differently. I've been reading structural drawings for 30 years, and in the last 11 months I've become better at it than I have ever been. The problem is that I can't run the seismic calculations fast enough to fix this in time. My team can, but I haven't told my team what's wrong." She stopped typing. Then she added, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." He read it. He wrote, "Because I didn't ask." She looked at this sentence. She did not understand it immediately. And then she did, because it was true. He had not asked anything about her. He had just worked alongside her without performing concern or curiosity, without making it about himself. The telling had happened because there was space for it, not because it had been extracted. She turned and looked at him directly. He met her gaze. His eyes were dark and steady, and this was the word she found for it later, in the note she wrote to herself that night in the hotel room: patient. Not kind exactly, not sympathetic, something more fundamental than that. patient, as though he had been waiting for whatever came next for a very long time, and was not in a hurry and was not afraid of it. She typed one more thing. My name is Eleanor Voss. He wrote, I know you were on the cover of Architecture Quarterly, March 3 years ago. She read it, something happened in her face that she could not have described. Then he wrote below it, you designed the Meridian crossing in Boston, the cantilever sequence on the pedestrian span. I've never seen anyone solve that problem that way before. She looked at this for a long time. Then she looked out the window. The plane touched down. His name was Richard Alt. He held the title of Chief Operations Officer at Veridian Structural Solutions. He had held it for 4 years. He was 47 years old, educated at MIT, well-dressed in the specific way of men who have spent considerable money learning to look as though they haven't spent considerable money on their clothes. He was also the person who had submitted the pre-amendment specification. Not by accident. The amendment to Seattle's seismic code had been published 18 months ago. Richard Alt had received it in an automated regulatory update email from the Pacific Northwest Building Standards Board on the day of publication. This was not in dispute. The email existed, the timestamp existed, the delivery confirmation existed. What Richard had done with it was the question. What Richard had done was file it in a folder labeled PNW Regulatory and not forward it to the project team. He had then, and this part would take longer to discover, submitted the Cascade Gateway drawings using the pre-amendment specification, with Eleanor's countersignature obtained on a cover sheet that did not enumerate the individual specifications contained within. The question of why was the kind of question that required understanding what Richard Alt wanted. What Richard Alt wanted was the company. Not violently, not with dramatic ambition. He wanted it the way a man who has waited a long time for something thinks he deserves it, quietly, methodically, with the kind of patience that looks like competence until you study it carefully enough to see that it is something else entirely. Eleanor Voss's hearing loss, if revealed publicly, would raise questions about her fitness to lead. Richard had not caused her hearing loss, but he had been aware of it, or strongly suspected it, for at least 8 months, based on behavioral observations he had catalogued in a private document on his personal laptop. The failed specification was insulation. If the Cascade Gateway contract fell apart due to a specification error made under Eleanor's leadership during a period when Eleanor's fitness to lead was already compromised, the board would have questions, and Richard Alt would be the person with the answers. He had already drafted in broad strokes the memo he intended to present. He was at his desk on the 27th floor of Veridian's Seattle office. They maintained a satellite office 2 blocks from City Hall, when Priya called to say that Eleanor had landed and was en route. He said, "Thank you, Priya." He said it pleasantly. He closed the private document. He straightened his jacket. He did not know about the man from the hotel. Marcus Hale had been to Seattle once before, 12 years ago, as a licensed structural engineer with a firm called Brentwood and Associates, for a seismic assessment of a commercial building on First Avenue. He had stayed in a hotel near Pike Place Market and eaten salmon 2 nights running at a restaurant whose name he had forgotten. He had found the city full of a particular quality of gray light that he liked. He did not know any of this was about to matter. He had come to a conference. He went to the conference. He sat in the first session, Sustainable HVAC in Legacy Hotel Structures, and took notes with his mechanical pencil and asked 2 questions that the presenter could not immediately answer and had to follow up on by email. He ate a granola bar from his jacket pocket during the networking lunch because he found networking lunches exhausting. He called Lily at 3:45 her time, which was when she got home from school. She answered by signing through the video call. She had made a paper crane at school, an art project. She held it up. It was slightly asymmetrical but otherwise respectable. He signed back, "That's a good one." She signed, "It leans a little." He signed, "Buildings lean a little too, it's okay." She laughed. He could see her laugh without hearing it, and the seeing was enough. It had always been enough. After the call, he sat for a while in his hotel room. He had the legal pad in front of him. He was thinking about Eleanor Voss's problem. He was not sure precisely why he was still thinking about it. He had given her the path. He had been clear about what was needed and how long it would take. He had done what he could do in the time and space available. The thing that was bothering him was the soil boring report. At 7:14 that evening his phone buzzed, a number he didn't have saved. A text message, all text, no voice. "This is Eleanor Voss. My team found a problem with the boring report. One of the sections is missing, the one that covers the liquefaction analysis at the Tower 2 footprint. I don't know if it was always missing or if something happened to it. I need to think about what to do with that information. I thought you should know. He read it twice. He typed back, who ran the boring survey. A long pause, then a subcontractor, Alt Engineering Associates. They're a subsidiary of my COO's former firm. He read this. He put his phone down. He looked at the ceiling of the hotel room. He picked his phone back up. He typed, who submitted the pre-amendment specification to the city council. Another pause, longer this time. Then Richard Alt. He typed, is Richard Alt related to Alt Engineering Associates? The pause this time was very long. Then his brother. Marcus set his phone on the nightstand. He looked at the photograph he had set there, Lily with the coloring book, because he carried it in his wallet and took it out when he traveled, because the room needed something real in it. He picked up his phone. He typed, you need to request the full project file from your server archive, not from your COO. Get your IT director to pull it directly. Tonight if you can, don't tell Alt you're pulling it. He sent it. He put the phone down. He picked up the Architecture of Happiness and read 12 pages without retaining much of them. At 11:46 p.m. his phone buzzed again. My IT director pulled the archive. The original boring report has all sections. The copy in our active project file is missing section 9. Section 9 was removed. The file modification timestamp is 14 months ago. Richard Alt's credentials were the last to access the file. Then 30 seconds later, I think I've been running a company I thought I understood. Then 1 minute later, I'm sorry to be sending you these. I don't have anyone else to send them to. That's a strange thing to realize. He read them all. He typed, don't be sorry, secure the archive copy. Send it to your legal counsel tonight, not tomorrow. Screenshot the modification log, send that too. He paused. Then he added, you understood the company fine. One person hid something from you. That's not the same as not understanding. He sent it. He turned the light off. He did not sleep immediately. He lay in the dark and thought about soil. He thought about the specific behavior of saturated granular sediment under seismic load. He thought about the 1.4 safety factor and what it meant in practice, which was, buildings stay standing when the ground moves, people go home to their families. Children wake up in the morning in houses that are still houses. He thought that's what the number is for, that's always what the number is for. He slept. Dignity and conditions. The morning of the third day, Richard Alt arrived at the Seattle office at 7:30. He was pleasant, he was composed, he wore a jacket the color of charcoal and a tie with a subtle pattern. He poured himself a coffee from the kitchen and greeted 3 colleagues by name. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His laptop had been imaged by Veridian's IT security team at 2:17 that morning, pursuant to an instruction from Eleanor Voss, via a written order transmitted through her legal counsel. He did not know this yet. At 9:05, Eleanor Voss walked into the Seattle office. She had also not slept, but she had showered and changed, and her face was arranged in the specific expression she wore when she was making a decision she would not revisit. She walked past the assistant desks, she walked past the glass-walled conference room, she walked to Richard Alt's office and she opened the door. Richard looked up. He said something. Eleanor could not hear him. She could read from his expression and the position of his mouth that he was saying something pleasant, a greeting, something with her name in it. She placed a folder on his desk. Inside the folder were a printout of the server access log showing the modification of the boring report, a printout of the regulatory update email sent to Richard's account 18 months ago, a PDF of the original complete boring report pulled from the archive, and a 1-paragraph letter from her legal counsel advising Richard that the company was conducting a formal investigation. She watched his face. She watched it change. She had looked at a lot of things in the past 11 months in a way she had never had to before. She had looked at faces the way she used to look at buildings, for what the structure revealed, not what the surface announced. She saw in the span of 12 seconds Richard Alt's face move through 4 distinct expressions, and the fourth one, which arrived after the others had tried and failed, was the one that told her everything she needed to know. It was not guilt. It was calculation. He was already, even now, thinking about what to say. She held her hand up, palm out. He stopped. She placed a second piece of paper on the desk. It said, "Your access to company systems has been suspended as of midnight. Your legal rights in this matter are outlined in the letter from counsel. This meeting is concluded." She picked up the folder. She walked out. Oliver Crane was waiting in the large conference room. Oliver was 53 years old, the color of a man who had spent many years outdoors before spending many years indoors, and he had the posture of someone who is always slightly worried about structural load. He was the finest structural engineer Eleanor had ever worked with, and she had treated him over the past 11 months in a way that she now recognized was not fair to him. She sat across from him. She pushed her phone across the table. On it was a long note she had typed that morning. It began, "Oliver, I have to tell you something that I should have told you 11 months ago." It described her hearing loss. It described what she had done to hide it. It described the consequences, the missed words, the knotted agreements, the "I said it was fine" that she had said when she had not fully heard the question. It ended, "I'm sorry, you deserved better from me than that." Oliver read it. He read it for a long time. When he looked up, his face had the expression of a man who has just had something confirmed that he already knew but had not allowed himself to say out loud. He reached across the table. He put his hand briefly on the back of hers. She looked down at his hand. She typed, "I need to fix the Tower 2 specification by Thursday. I have a path. I need your team to run the calculations." He nodded. She typed, "I also need someone who can run the liquefaction analysis from scratch, using the complete boring report. The person I have in mind is not a Veridian employee. He's a structural engineer. He's in Seattle for a conference. I'd like to ask him to consult." Oliver typed on his own phone and showed her, "What's his background?" She typed, "Licensed in Illinois and Washington. Formerly at I don't actually know the firm. He left practice for a family reason." Oliver typed name. She typed Marcus Hale. Oliver looked at this for a moment. He typed, "I've heard that name, I don't know from where." She typed, "He designed the load distribution system on a bridge somewhere. I don't know which one, he didn't mention it." Oliver nodded slowly. He typed, "You trust him?" She looked at this. She typed, "Yes." Oliver sat back. He put his phone down. He looked at the ceiling and then back at her, and then he typed, "Then let's get him in here." Eleanor Voss drove herself to the Westin. She did not send Priya. She did not send a car. She drove the rental, a silver Audi that she had picked up at the airport and parked without using the parking sensors because she found them distracting. And she found the hotel entrance and she went inside and she asked the desk for Marcus Hale's room number, and the desk called his room and a moment later came back and said, "He's in the conference on the second floor, the Sustainable Systems session." She took the elevator to the second floor. The session was in a room called the Columbia Room. She looked through the window in the door. There were perhaps 40 people in the room, a presenter at the front, rows of chairs. In the third row, a man in a gray jacket was writing in a legal pad with a mechanical pencil. She pushed the door open. She walked to the third row. She sat in the empty chair beside him. He looked at her. She held out her phone. It said, "My COO has been removed. The investigation is underway. My structural engineer Oliver Crane has everything he needs to run the calculations. I'm asking if you'll consult on the liquefaction analysis. 2 days, I'll pay your full daily rate as a licensed engineer." He read it. He looked at the presenter, who was discussing heat recovery ventilation systems in ways that were, Marcus considered, moderately interesting. He wrote on the legal pad, "I'm here for a conference." She typed, "I know." He wrote, "I'll need to request release from the sessions." She typed, "I can arrange it." He wrote, "I need to be done by Thursday 3 p.m. I have a flight back." She typed, "Done." He wrote, "I'll do it on one condition." She waited. He wrote, "The analysis goes out under your company name and Oliver Crane's signature, not mine. I don't want my name on the contract or the filing." She read this. She typed, "Why?" He wrote, "Because the work is what matters, not the name." She held the phone. She looked at it. Then she typed, "All right." He tore a sheet from the legal pad. He wrote a number on it. It was not a large number. It was a fair number. It was the number of a man who knows what his work is worth and has no interest in performing the negotiation. She looked at it. She typed, "Done." He wrote, "One more thing." She waited. He wrote, "In the city council session on Friday, Your chief structural engineer presents the corrected specification. You sit beside him, you don't apologize for the error in the meeting, that's for your lawyers to manage. You just present the solution, clearly without hedging. She read this. She typed, "You're telling me how to run my presentation." He wrote, "I'm telling you what I've noticed. You spent the whole flight reading specifications and you were right about every one of them. You understand this project better than anyone in your organization. Act like it." She looked at this for a long time. Something crossed her face. She stood up. She held out her hand. He shook it. She left. He turned back to the presenter, who had moved on to geothermal exchange systems and was now, Marcus thought, becoming genuinely interesting. He wrote it down. What gets built? The next 44 hours were the kind that compress strangely in memory, dense and particular, and then somehow brief. Marcus arrived at Veridian's Seattle office at 8 a.m. the following morning. He wore the same gray jacket, he had his legal pad, he had his mechanical pencils. He had a coffee from the lobby cart in a paper cup, which was not ideal but was sufficient. Oliver Crane met him at the 11th floor conference room. They did not shake hands for a long time or make speeches. Oliver said, "I pulled the complete boring report. Section 9 is thorough, good work on that site." Marcus said, "It's not my work." Oliver said, "I know, I'm complimenting the site team." Marcus nodded. The liquefaction potential index at the Tower 2 footprint is going to be higher than your original model assumed. We'll need to run the Youdidris correlation against the corrected cyclic resistance ratio. Oliver said, "I've got a geotechnical specialist on the line at 9. She's done 3 projects on Seattle waterfront fill." Marcus said, "Good." They sat down. They worked. The geotechnical specialist was a woman named Dr. Than Nguyen, who was in Vancouver and appeared on a laptop screen that Oliver angled toward Marcus across the conference table. She had the clipped, efficient speech of someone who did not tolerate imprecision in either direction, not vagueness and not false confidence. Marcus explained what he needed. He explained it clearly with the specific numbers without preamble. Dr. Nguyen said, "You've done this analysis before." Marcus said, "A few times." She said, "Which projects?" He said, "It doesn't matter." She paused. Oliver watched this exchange with an expression of mild interest. Then she said, "All right, send me the boring data. I'll have the liquefaction potential numbers to you by 1. She was done by 12:40. The numbers were better than Marcus had feared. The liquefaction potential at the Tower 2 footprint was elevated, not catastrophically but meaningfully, and the correction required to the transfer beam specification was significant but not a redesign. It was, as Marcus had said on the plane, a correction. He and Oliver worked through the afternoon. Oliver's team, 3 engineers in their 30s, all competent, one of them exceptional, ran the revised lateral force calculations. Marcus checked them. He found 2 errors. He did not announce them. He wrote the corrections on a slip of paper and passed it to the relevant engineer, who looked at it and then looked at Marcus and then made the changes without speaking. At 6:20 p.m., Oliver put down his pen. He said, "We have it." Marcus looked at the revised specification. He read it once through. He said, "The appendix needs 1 more line, the foundation bearing assumption at the southwest corner." Oliver looked, he read, he picked up his pen and wrote the line. He said, "Now we have it." Marcus nodded. Oliver said, "I'd like to credit you on the analysis." Marcus said, "No." Oliver said, "You did the substantive work." Marcus said, "I checked the work, your team ran it. Dr. Nguyen's analysis was the core, it's your specification." Oliver looked at him for a moment. He said, "You're a strange man." Marcus said, "I've been told." He put on his jacket, he picked up his legal pad. He looked around the conference room, the whiteboard covered in calculations, the coffee cups, the laptop with Dr. Nguyen's data still open, the 3 engineers who were putting their papers in order with the quiet satisfaction of people who have done something right. He said, "Good work." He left. On Thursday morning, Eleanor Voss sat in a chair outside the conference room and waited for Oliver to run one final check on the filing documents. Her phone buzzed. A number she had saved now, Marcus Hale. The text said, "Flight's at 3, good luck tomorrow, you know this project, don't be quiet about it." She read it. She started to type something, she erased it, she typed again. She sent your daughter, Lily. The reason you left practice, is she all right? The pause. Then yes, she's good, she's doing well. She typed, she's lucky. He sent back, I'm the lucky one. She held the phone. She looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, the gray-green city, the water, the cranes in the distance that stood over construction sites like patient metal herons. She thought someone built all of that. Someone ran the numbers and checked the numbers and the building stood. She thought that's all any of it is, running the numbers, checking them, making sure the thing stands. She typed one more thing, and she sent it before she could think about whether it was the right thing to say. Thank you, not for the specification, for the other thing. He replied, what other thing? She typed, you were the first person I told, in 11 months, you made it easy to do. The pause. Then you made it easy, you just needed the space. She looked at this. She put the phone in her pocket. Oliver Crane knocked on the glass. He held up the filing documents. He nodded. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the door. Friday morning, City Hall, Seattle, the Cascade Gateway Project Review. The room held 22 people. 7 city council members, 3 planning officials, 4 members of the public, and 8 Veridian representatives including Oliver Crane and Eleanor Voss. Richard Alt was not there. Eleanor sat beside Oliver at the long table. In front of her was a copy of the corrected specification printed and bound. In front of Oliver was the laptop with the full presentation. In front of the council members were their own copies delivered by courier the previous evening with a cover letter from Veridian's legal team that described the specification correction, outlined the circumstances of the error, and requested the council's consideration. Council member Sandra Kerr, the woman who had written the original letter, who had short silver hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain, looked up from the cover letter. She said something. Eleanor read her lips. Ms. Voss, would you like to start? Eleanor looked at Oliver. He gave her the smallest nod, not reassuring, not parental, just ready. Eleanor turned back to Sandra Kerr. She said, yes, thank you. Her voice, she knew, was probably slightly louder than it needed to be. She had learned to accept this. She said, I'd like to begin by explaining what changed in this specification and why the change makes the project stronger. Then Oliver Crane, our chief structural engineer, will walk you through the revised calculations in detail. I want to be specific because I think specificity is what this project deserves. She paused. She said, the Tower 2 transfer beams were originally specified to the pre-2023 seismic standard. The revised specification incorporates the liquefaction zone amendment at a 1.4 safety factor, supported by a complete soil analysis of the Tower 2 footprint. The result is a foundation design that is not merely compliant, it is, in Oliver's assessment and my own, exceptionally resilient. I want to explain why. She talked for 7 minutes. She did not hedge, she did not apologize in the meeting, she did not deflect. She talked about the soil, she talked about the seismic loads. She talked about what the numbers meant in terms of the building's behavior in a significant earthquake, not abstractly but concretely in the language of what happens to the structure and therefore to the people inside it. Sandra Kerr listened. At one point she leaned toward the council member beside her and said something. Eleanor could not hear it. But she watched the council member's face. He nodded. Oliver's presentation took 40 minutes. At the end, Sandra Kerr removed her glasses from the chain. She said something that Eleanor caught only partially, 3 words at the end. She turned to Oliver. He typed on his phone under the table and slid it to her. It said, she said, this is what we needed. Eleanor looked at the phone. She looked back at Sandra Kerr. She said, thank you for the opportunity to get it right. The formal apology happened in the Veridian boardroom. Not the Seattle office. The Chicago office, the one on the 27th floor with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the rosewood table and the view of a city that, if you knew how to look at it, was a record of every structural decision anyone had ever made about what to put where and how much weight it had to carry. It was 8 days after the council session. The investigation into Richard Alt had produced a report that was now in the hands of 3 lawyers and 1 district attorney's office. Richard Alt had resigned. His brother's firm had surrendered the boring report contract. Eleanor stood at the head of the table. The board was there, 9 people, most of whom had worked with her for more than a decade. Priya was there, Oliver was there. She had practiced what she needed to say in writing in her hotel room at 2 in the morning, because she could not hear herself speak, and she wanted the words to be right before she gave them. She said, "I have to tell you something I should have said 11 months ago." She said it clearly. She said all of it. She did not watch their faces while she said it. She watched the window, the city, the gray October light, the cranes. When she was done, she looked at them. She held her phone up. It had a note on it. The note said, "I'm still capable of leading this company, better than before actually, but I can't do it dishonestly, so now you know." She put the phone down. She waited. The first person to speak was Oliver Crane. He said something she could not fully read. He pushed a sheet of paper across the table to her. It said, "I've been watching you run structural calculations from the head of the table for 8 years. You've never been wrong, that doesn't change." She looked at the paper. She looked at Oliver. Then Priya said something. Eleanor caught the first word, "we." She turned to Priya. Priya pulled her chair closer and spoke slowly, facing Eleanor directly. She had learned to do this in the past 8 days, since Eleanor had told her, without making it feel like accommodation, just consideration. Priya said, "We want to know what you need from us to make this work. What changes, what support, whatever it is." Eleanor looked at her. The boardroom was very quiet. She looked at the rosewood table, the long grain of it, the way the October light ran along it in a stripe. She looked at the city beyond the windows. She thought of a man in a gray jacket on an airplane, writing structural calculations with a mechanical pencil in a way so precise that she could read the numbers from the next seat. She thought, the most important structures are always the ones you can't see. She said, "I'll need a few things." She said them. The board voted. It was unanimous. She called Marcus that afternoon from her car. She typed because calling felt still difficult. The board knows the vote was unanimous. The Cascade Gateway is moving forward. The pause. Then good. She typed, "I want to offer you the consulting contract on Tower 2. Full project, your name on the structural documents." A longer pause. Then no. She waited. He sent, "I appreciate it, but my job is at the Ashford. I have a reason for being there." She typed, "Lily." He sent, "Yes." She typed, "I'm going to make a donation to the Fitzgerald School, anonymous. I'd like you to not argue with me about it." A very long pause. Then, "All right." She typed, "I have one more question." She paused. She typed slowly. "On the plane, when I held out my phone and asked if you were a structural engineer, and you wrote back, 'I was, what's the problem?' Why didn't you ask what was wrong with me? Why didn't you ask about the phone, the typing? Why didn't you ask any of it?" Oh, she sent it. She watched the screen. He wrote for a while. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then he sent, "Because the problem was in front of you and you needed help with the problem. The rest wasn't mine to ask." She read this. She looked out the windshield at the parking garage wall. She typed, "You're going to say that I already knew the answer to this question." He sent back, "Did you?" She typed, "Yes." He sent, "Then you didn't need to ask it." She looked at this for a long time. Then she put the phone down and started the car and drove out of the parking structure into the gray Chicago afternoon. Marcus landed at O'Hare at 6:48 p.m. He took the blue line to the north side. He walked 4 blocks. He let himself into his mother's house with his key. Lily was at the kitchen table with a worksheet, her hearing aids in, a pencil in her hand. She looked up when he came in. He signed, "How was school?" She signed, "Good, we learned about bridges." He sat down across from her. He put the duffel bag down. He looked at her worksheet, arithmetic column addition. He signed, "What kind of bridges?" She signed, "Suspension bridges, the kind with the wires. Ms. Ananda says the wires hold the whole thing up." He signed, "The cables, yes." She signed, "How do they know how many cables you need?" He thought about this. He signed, "You calculate the load, all the weight the bridge has to carry, then you calculate how much weight each cable can hold, then you make sure you have enough." She looked at him with the expression she had when she was deciding whether an answer was satisfying. She signed, "What if you calculate wrong?" He signed, "Then you fix it." She nodded as though this were obvious. She picked up her pencil. He sat beside her and did not speak, because she was working and he had learned long ago that she preferred company to conversation when she was working, and he had learned to tell the difference. His mother appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She set one in front of Marcus. She looked at Lily with the expression of a woman who has loved 2 generations of the same stubbornness. She said something to Marcus that he could hear. He was the one in this family still who could, and she went back into the kitchen. She had said, "You look tired." He drank his tea. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at this hour, settling into its evening, its lights coming on in ones and twos, its structures holding their weight in silence, as they always had, as they had been built to do. 2 weeks later, a small package arrived at the Ashford Hotel, addressed to Marcus Hale, facilities coordinator. Inside, a book, The Architecture of Happiness by Elaine de Botton, a new copy, hardcover. Inside the front cover, in handwriting that was careful and slightly larger than it needed to be, the handwriting of a person calibrating their effort, was a note. It said, "You left yours on the plane. OEV. P.S. You were right about the Meridian crossing. The cantilever. I solved it at 3 in the morning after 6 months of not solving it. What I've realized 11 months later is that you solve the hardest problems when you're finally quiet enough to hear them. Hearing them differently, as it turns out, is not the worst thing." Marcus read it once. He set the book on his desk, next to the photograph of Lily. He turned back to the drainage schematic he had been reviewing, a problem in the 14th floor east corridor, a small thing, a thing that wanted solving. He picked up his mechanical pencil. He never told anyone at the Ashford what had happened in Seattle. Rosario noticed a new book on his desk. She did not ask about it. She brought his coffee at 6:45 in the ceramic mug because paper cups made good coffee taste like wet cardboard. She was not wrong. The Cascade Gateway Towers broke ground the following spring. They stand today, 3 buildings on a fault line above reclaimed land, built to withstand what the earth beneath them might one day do. The transfer beams in Tower 2 were manufactured to a specification that nobody remembers the origin of. They are simply correct. That is the thing about the best structural work. It disappears into what it holds up.